jump into segment 3. Segment 3 is about, we just talked about the why, and then we told you the types. Then we're going to talk about here is just really give you a decision framework on which model to take that you're doing if you're in these sessions or BD sessions, really shaping the customer on what type of contract this effort should be on, right? And when you select it, you got to think about that contract model. When you select, you got to think about, how you balance the uncertainty on what you can control, and then the incentives to make sure, because the incentives are aware of that, right? And here's some things you should be thinking about. About 7 things, right? Obviously, number 1 is technical maturity and risk, right? If you got a well understood system, right, it's probably gonna be fixed price. If it's brand new, below TRL 6, you probably want some risk that they lean on their side, right? And so you got to think about that. You got to think about another in your decision. You got to think about what's the customer risk appetite. Now, how much risk they willing to take. This is where you bring in your business development professionals who usually have the close contact conversations with the end customer, saying how much risk are they willing to really take? How bad do they need this, TRL 4 capability? How bad do they really need it? How much risk? And have we articulated that? This is where you got to go figure that out. Another third thing is scope. What's the scope clarity? How, it's like building that sandbox and you setting that foundation on what the scope is, right? Because if you don't get the scope down, the scope creep will come. And if you don't have the cages to keep that scope creep in line, if you don't have that built in the contract, it's going to be some issues, just so you know. That's how it works. Mm-hmm. Other things like duration, how you want to expect change. Another thing about, cash flow, capital overhead. That's all the, when you think about how much you got to allocate to it, that's when your contract and your financial models really come in and kick in. When I talked about the administrative piece, what's the burden of all this audit and compliance, and how many CDRs, contract out line items I got to do, how many DDRs I got to do, how many data sources do we need, how much reporting alone can be expensive, right? I mean, you got to have a whole standing army to do reporting. And then last but not least, the incentives of, hey, if I get X, can we agree that I get Y? Right. And it's really that simple. And if they value the performance, which they all do, you want to incentivize, make sure the incentivization is in the contract. So when you hit those performance metrics, right? And that's important. You got an example on that, Rob? You want to walk us through?
Yeah. So I think, one example comes to mind when, let's suppose you're bidding a new satellite system. The architecture is risky, many unknowns in, thermal, radiation, integration. But suppose you might propose a cost plus incentive fee in these phases. So early phases is cost based. Later phases is fixed price. Once risks are retired, if the customer is comfortable, you might build and award incentives for weight, launch margin, and also the schedule. So, that's just a quick example about, how you could walk through, different cost models and how that could impact the various life cycles of your product. Which is, great, from a contract model, because you have that structure that you spoke about earlier, how you understand it and how you walk through it with the customer. I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to what you and the customer could agree to. And that's like the legalese to, work that out from that standpoint. But, the basis of understanding of, that framework, the decision framework you talked about, and how that moves forward is going to be, great for your knowledge going forward. Excellent.
Yeah, so let's get into a couple more other things, and then we're going to close out. Really going to talk about, just the incentive piece and how to design that with the risk structure that you're going to put into, and then Rob also we're going to walk through some real world programs that just popped off now that show these various models that will give you some examples of that, and then we'll close out for the day. But there are all types of risks on the program. You got schedule costs, integration, supply chain, and you got to weigh them, each one of them carefully, right? Separately but equal. And then you got to limit your exposure if you're a contractor, right? You make sure you control what you can control And like what's that old Samuel L. Jackson line, those known unknowns, right? From Boondocks, right? You better have some structure in your contract to help you deal with those things that unknowingly happen, right? You have a vendor part that's late, right? Or there's some regulatory changes that happen in the middle of you performing this, executing this contract. Those are things that's there. You got to look at that. From an incentive perspective, you can do all kinds of things. We kind of talked about it earlier. You can talk about, sharing the costs, do a 50-50 split on the costs and the share of the savings and overruns. Customer love you giving back money to them. They always love that, right? You can talk about, what helps with award fees or award incentives. For example, if you displaced a incumbent from another technology and you bring your technology in, you want to maybe get an award fee because you have a better delivery rate. You're going to propose a better delivery rate, on-time performance, on-time delivery than that past person. That might be something you want to put in there. Things like performance incentives, mission success rate, default, and then also your milestone payments, schedule incentives, and any time how you do your liquidated damages. All that stuff is in that incentive structure. And then you want to set the targets such that there's a motivation to exceed the baseline of what you want, but don't be so aggressive that everybody's failed. So you got to have this zone of performance that you want to have. You want to have a below the line piece, a target, a threshold, and then a structure of what you can do, because customers only going to pay you so much, right? But it depends on the hook. So you just got to be honest with that. You can't start, hey, you're going to give me a 50% bump if I'm, 10% up on my OTD. That don't make sense, right? Things like that. And then also with all these things, how you going to manage the changes, right? And you got to have a mechanism if there's a rebaseline that needs to happen, because those are real. They happen. We don't like to say it, but rebaselining can be a bad word, but they happen. There's a truth in that. It's something, and it might be something you just can't control. And you got to make sure that you don't penalize yourself because you got to do that rebaseline.